The bag hit the floor before I saw my son's face. It slid off the seat beside him and landed on its side, spilling a small stuffed giraffe and a folded jacket onto the terminal floor. I noticed that first. Then I heard my granddaughter say, "Daddy." It fell again. That was when my chest locked up. I had been walking through the departure hall of the airport on my way back from a conference in Phoenix. My flight home was in 2 hours. I had stopped at a coffee stand near gate C12 when I saw them. My son, sitting on a hard plastic chair with 2 large duffel bags at his feet, and my 5-year-old granddaughter asleep against his arm. His eyes were open but not really looking at anything. He had that expression I remembered from when he was 17 and his father left. That hollow, swallowed stillness. I almost kept walking. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him. But then he turned his head and saw me, and his face did something it rarely does. It crumpled. "Mom?" he said. Just that one word. I crossed the terminal in what felt like 3 steps. I knelt down in front of my granddaughter and brushed the hair from her face gently so I wouldn't wake her. Then I looked up at my son. His eyes were red. He hadn't shaved in at least 2 days. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice low and steady. He rubbed his jaw. "We had nowhere else to go." I sat down beside him. "Talk to me." He looked at the bags on the floor. "He shut me out," he said quietly. "My father-in-law. He changed the locks this morning. The restaurant, the prep kitchen, the storage unit, all of it." He paused. "He said my name isn't on the lease." I let the words settle. My son had spent 4 years building that restaurant from a shuttered diner on the edge of town into something real. He had worked 7 days a week the first year. He had refinished the floors himself. He had developed every recipe in that kitchen. When he married, his father-in-law had come in as a silent investor and put his name on the lease as a condition of the loan. My son had agreed because he trusted the family, because he loved his wife, because he thought family meant something to them. "And your wife?" I asked carefully. He was quiet for a long time. She didn't stop him. My granddaughter shifted in her sleep. I watched her little hand curl against my son's arm. "Get your bags," I said. "Both of you are coming home with me." He started to say something about my flight, about the time, about not wanting to be a problem. I held up one hand. He stopped talking. He knew that look. I called my assistant from the car and had my flight changed. My son sat in the passenger seat staring out the window while my granddaughter dozed in the back. I did not push him to talk. I just drove. What I did not tell him was that on my phone, sitting unread in my inbox, was a message my assistant had forwarded that morning. It had come from the restaurant's business account. A notice of restructuring, a name change, a new filing removing my son as a co-owner on the grounds that he had voluntarily abandoned his role. He had not abandoned anything. And I knew exactly what was happening. His father-in-law was a man who wore generosity like a coat he never took off. He gave loudly, in front of people, so everyone would remember. When my son first brought him to meet me, years ago, the man had gripped my hand and said he was honored to welcome our family into his. He smiled with every tooth. I smiled back. I was polite. But I had built a business myself, from a catering company started in my own kitchen to a firm that now handled corporate events across 3 states. I knew the difference between a man who builds and a man who acquires. He was an acquirer. That night I made dinner while my son sat at the kitchen table watching my granddaughter draw horses on a paper placemat. She was very serious about the horses. She gave each one a name and asked me if I wanted to hear them. I said yes. She listed 12 horses, all of them named after flowers or weather. One was named Thunder Daisy. I told her that was the best name I had ever heard. She beamed. My son almost smiled. After my granddaughter fell asleep in the guest room, I brought my son tea he did not drink and sat across from him. He told me everything then, how the comments had started small. First about the restaurant's hours, then about the menu, then about my son's management decisions. How his father-in-law had begun showing up unannounced during service and pulling staff aside for conversations my son was never told about. How the man had started referring to the place as my restaurant in public, in interviews, in the local paper profile that ran the spring before. How my son had brought it up to his wife and she had told him he was being sensitive, that her father was just proud, that it was harmless. Then 3 weeks ago, my son had found a secondary set of books. Not the ones he kept. A parallel record that showed different ownership percentages, A different version of the original investment agreement. A different story entirely. When he confronted his father-in-law, the man had leaned back in his chair and said, "You should be grateful. Most people don't get handed a future like this." My son said he had never felt smaller in his life. I listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, I cleaned the mugs, dried my hands, and went to my office. I opened a filing cabinet I had not opened in 2 years. Inside was a folder marked with the restaurant's name. My son did not know I had kept copies of everything: the original investment agreement his father-in-law had signed, the promissory note, the email chain from the early weeks where the terms had been discussed. In writing, clearly, my son had sent me copies when the deal was made, just to have a second set of eyes. I had kept them because I keep everything. I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I made 2 calls. The second one was to a business attorney I had worked with for 12 years. The first one was to someone I trusted more than almost anyone, a woman who had helped me structure my own company and who had a habit of finding what people tried to hide. By the time I went to bed, pieces were already moving. My son was asleep on the couch when I came downstairs the next morning. He had turned the television on low to something he wasn't watching. I stepped over his feet gently and started coffee. What I did not tell him was that I had also, late the night before, read a second message. It had come from an unknown number and said simply, "He's already filed to remove your son from the registration. It goes through in 48 hours. 48 hours. I poured my coffee and stood at the window. Some people think power means moving fast, being loud, making sure everyone sees you act. They forget that the people who actually build things learn to move quietly and precisely, the way you place a foundation stone, not with noise, but with intention. I made breakfast. Eggs, toast, fruit cut into small pieces because my granddaughter preferred it that way. When she came downstairs, she was still holding the paper with the 12 horses from the night before. She asked me if she could hang it on the refrigerator. I said, absolutely. She found the magnets herself. My son watched from across the room. For just a moment, his expression was completely unguarded, something soft and sad and grateful all at once. By mid-morning, I was at my attorney's office with the folder. He spread the documents across his conference table and went through them slowly. When he finished, he looked up over his glasses. "The original agreement is clear," he said. "Your son is a full co-owner. The secondary documents being filed are in direct contradiction to a signed, dated, notarized agreement. Can they go through?" I asked. "Not if we move today," he said. I nodded. Then we moved today. He made calls while I sat in the chair across from his desk. I listened to him speak in that precise, unhurried way he had that made people on the other end of the line understand that things were serious, without him ever having to raise his voice. I had always appreciated that about him. While I waited, my phone buzzed. A message from my son's father-in-law. I had not spoken to the man in several months. The message read, "I think we should talk, before this becomes something no one can walk back from. I'd like to keep this civil, for everyone's sake." Civil. That word. I did not respond. What I did instead was forward the message to my attorney and then open a second document on my laptop. My assistant had sent me, that morning, a compilation of public records filings, business registration changes, and a set of screenshots from a community business forum where my son's father-in-law had, in the past 6 months, made 3 separate posts, referring to the restaurant as my family's place and discussing plans for expansion that my son had never been part of. That afternoon, my son called me from the house. His voice was careful. "Mum, he's been calling. He says he wants to meet. He says this is all a misunderstanding." "I know," I said. A pause. "What are you doing?" "What I should have started doing 3 weeks ago when you first told me something was wrong," I said. "Don't meet with him." Another pause. Longer this time. "Mum, what if this ruins everything? The restaurant, his family, my wife's relationship with." "He already started the ruining," I said gently. "I'm just making sure it stops." My son went quiet. Then he said, "She called me this morning." "My wife?" I waited. "She said she didn't know he was going to do it like this," he said. "She said she thought he was just going to buy us out. She didn't know about the filings." I chose my words carefully. "Did you believe her?" He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he said. That was honest. I respected that. That evening, my granddaughter asked if we could make cookies. We made snickerdoodles. She stood on a step stool beside me and very carefully rolled each ball in the cinnamon sugar, her tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration. When the first batch came out of the oven, she looked at them like they were treasure. "Can I bring some to Daddy?" she asked. "Absolutely," I said. She carried them to my son on a plate, with a paper towel as a napkin. He ate every one. She watched him with that satisfaction children have when they have solved a problem. I stood in the doorway and looked at the two of them, my son with cookie crumbs on his shirt, and my granddaughter sitting beside him explaining that snickerdoodles were her favorite because of the name, and something solidified in my chest. Not anger. Resolve. If you have ever been told that your work wasn't really yours, that your effort was just something you were allowed to do because someone more important permitted it, then you know exactly what I was feeling in that moment. And if you've ever watched someone you love be made to feel that way, then you know the feeling is worse. The next morning, my attorney called early. The emergency injunction had been filed. The 48-hour window was blocked. The filing to remove my son would be challenged, and a hearing had been scheduled for later that week. Then he said, "There's something else." I sat down. "We pulled the financial records," he said. "The full set. He's been reclassifying expenses. Restaurant revenue categorized under a separate LLC he controls. For at least 18 months. I closed my eyes. "How much?" He told me the number. I was quiet for a moment. "That's not a misunderstanding," I said. "No," my attorney said. "It's not." I asked him to have everything documented and ready. Then I made the call I had been thinking about since the night before. The call to the woman who helped me find what people tried to hide. She had a name for what she did, forensic financial consulting. But what it really meant was that she was very good at following money through doors that had been locked. She had been following this particular trail since I called her 2 nights ago. She had found 3 doors already. By the time the hearing came, we would have the full map. My son's father-in-law sent 2 more messages that day. The second one said, "I have supported your son generously for 4 years. I hope you understand what you're risking by making this adversarial." I understood exactly what I was risking. I also understood what he thought he was risking, which was much less than the reality. I did not respond. What I did not know until that evening was that he had also called my son's wife. Whatever he said to her, when she showed up at my front door 2 hours later, she was not the person my son had described to me over the past several weeks. She was not composed or defended. She was pale, and her hands were shaking slightly, and she asked if she could come in. I stepped back from the door. She sat at my kitchen table across from my son. My granddaughter was in the living room watching a movie, volume low. The 3 of us sat without speaking for a moment. "He told me what you filed," she said to me. "He's furious." "I expect he is," I said. She looked at my son. "I didn't know about the money," she said. "I need you to know that. I knew he was involved more than he should have been. I knew he was overstepping. I told myself he was just being protective. That's what he always calls it." She stopped. "I should have listened to you. When you told me something was wrong, I should have listened." My son looked at his hands. "I know that doesn't fix anything," she said. "I know saying I'm sorry isn't enough. But I want to fix this. I want to be on the right side of it." He looked up at her. Something passed between them that wasn't mine to interpret. Whatever it was, it lasted a long time. When my granddaughter called from the other room asking if the movie was almost over and could she have water please, my son's wife stood up and went to get it without being asked. She brought the cup in, sat down next to her daughter, and watched the last 10 minutes of the movie. I went to my office and let them have the space. The morning of the hearing, I dressed simply, dark blazer, flat shoes, the kind of deliberate plainness that says I am not here to impress anyone. I am here to work. My son wore a suit I had not seen before. He looked nervous in the way that people look when they know the truth is on their side but aren't yet sure the truth will be enough. I understood that feeling. I had felt it myself more than once. His wife came too. She brought a folder of her own, things she had gathered in the past 48 hours, her own records, her own observations, notes she had kept and never thought she would use. She handed the folder to my attorney without ceremony. He looked through it on the drive over. At one point he looked up and said, "This is very helpful." She nodded and looked out the window. The conference room at the courthouse was smaller than I expected. My son's father-in-law was already there when we arrived. He was wearing an expensive suit, and the practiced expression of a man who believes that presence alone is half the argument. His attorney was beside him, young and certain. He looked at my son, then at his daughter, then at me. His expression shifted just slightly, not enough for most people to notice. I noticed. "Barbara," he said to my son's wife. His voice had something in it that was meant to sound like warmth and landed closer to instruction. She said, "Hello, Dad," and sat down beside my son. The hearing began. His attorney presented the new filings, the reclassified ownership structure, the argument that the original agreement had been superseded by subsequent business decisions. It was a careful presentation, well rehearsed. He spoke about investment, about risk, about the contributions made by his client to the restaurant's success. My attorney waited. He was very good at waiting. When it was his turn, he did not raise his voice. He placed the original agreement on the table first, then the notarized copy, then the email chain, dated, showing the terms as they were negotiated and agreed to, then the forensic financial report, 46 pages, documenting the reclassification of revenue over 18 months, then a short document summarizing the public forum posts, the references to my restaurant, the expansion plans made without consultation. He said, "My client's son is the co-founder and co-owner of this business. The filings submitted by opposing counsel are in direct contradiction to a valid, binding agreement. Furthermore, the financial records show a pattern of unauthorized redirection of revenue that constitutes a serious legal matter, extending well beyond the scope of today's hearing." The room was quiet. My son's father-in-law leaned toward his attorney. I watched them. The young attorney's certainty had changed shape. He was listening now instead of waiting to speak. Then the mediator looked at my son's wife. "Mrs. Harris," she said, "do you wish to make a statement?" My son's wife looked at her father. He met her eyes. I watched what happened in his expression, the assumption that she would, as she always had, remain in a position that protected him. She looked back at the mediator. "Yes," she said. "I do." She spoke quietly but without hesitation. She described the pattern she had witnessed over 4 years, the slow accumulation of influence, the redefinition of her husband's role, the comments about who really deserved credit. She said she had minimized it because she loved her father and because she had told herself it was harmless. She said she had been wrong. "My husband built that restaurant," she said. "Every process, every recipe, every relationship with every supplier. My father provided capital in the first year. That is what the agreement reflects. What happened after that was not capital. It was control." She set her folder on the table. Her father's jaw tightened. "Barbara," he said. Low. Almost private. She looked at him calmly. "I'm not Barbara right now, Dad. I'm a witness." The mediator called a brief recess. In the hallway, my son stood by the window with his hands in his pockets. His wife stood beside him. They were not talking, just standing together in the particular closeness of two people who have been through something and are still deciding what comes next. I stood a little way apart and let them have it. My attorney appeared beside me. "The other side is reassessing," he said. The financial report changed the room. "It should," I said. He looked at me. "You knew he'd filed before your son did?" "Yes. And you said nothing to your son until you had the documentation. If I told him what I suspected without proof, he would have gone over there and confronted him directly," I said. "And then we would have had a conversation instead of a case." My attorney nodded slowly. "That's why you waited." "I waited," I said, "because rushing is what people do when they think urgency substitutes for preparation." He smiled. The financial investigation was running before the hearing was even scheduled. "Yes," I said. He shook his head slightly, not critical, just recognizing something. He had no idea what he was walking into today. He thought he was walking into a family argument, I said. He was wrong about what kind of room this was. The recess ended. When we returned to the table, opposing counsel made a significantly quieter presentation. They were no longer arguing the merits of the new filings with the same certainty. They were negotiating a position. By the end of the afternoon, the original ownership structure had been formally reinstated, pending the full legal review of the financial records. A separate investigation into the revenue reclassification had been referred to the appropriate authorities. My son was, on paper and in practice, exactly what he had always been, the founder and co-owner of the restaurant he had built. Outside, the afternoon had turned cool. My son stood on the courthouse steps and breathed in the air like someone who had been inside for a very long time. His wife stood beside him with her hand through his arm. My granddaughter was with my neighbor, safe and probably being given too many snacks, which I had instructed in advance. A woman passing on the sidewalk glanced up at us, curious about the little cluster of people on the steps, and kept walking. She had no idea what had just finished. That was fine. It wasn't for her. My son turned to me. "How long?" he said. "How long did you know?" "Long enough," I said. He looked at me for a moment. "You could have told me." "I know," I said. "But you needed to be protected, not warned. There's a difference." He was quiet. Then he said, "You protected me." "That's the job," I said. He hugged me then. This son of mine who is 6 inches taller than me and still, in the way of all children with their mothers, somehow smaller when he leans down and puts his arms around me. I held on. His wife touched my arm. "Thank you," she said, "for not giving up on him, and for not giving up on us." I looked at her. She had done a hard thing today. She had chosen the truth over the easier path, and she had done it in public, where it cost something. That mattered. "Take care of each other," I said. 3 months later, the restaurant had its best quarter. My son hired 2 new staff members and opened for Sunday brunch, something he had wanted to do for 2 years, but had put off during the period when every decision required a second approval he should never have needed to seek. My granddaughter had a standing arrangement, where every other Saturday we made something in my kitchen. Sometimes cookies, sometimes pasta. Once, memorably, a very ambitious attempt at croissants that did not go well structurally but tasted fine. Her list of 12 named horses was still on my refrigerator. I had laminated it. My son's father-in-law was under formal investigation. His name appeared in local business news in a way that had nothing to do with generosity or influence. His attorney had not returned calls in weeks. My son's wife was in the process of rebuilding something, not the business, but the trust that her silence had worn down. It was slow work. My son was patient with it in a way that surprised me and also did not surprise me at all, because he had always been steadier than he knew. One evening, I was at the restaurant for dinner, and he stopped at my table on his way through the room. He looked the way people look when they are standing in something they made and it is still standing, settled, real. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. "Better than okay," I said. He nodded, glanced around the room, at the tables full of people, at the warm light, at the floors he had sanded himself 4 years ago, and smiled. "Me too," he said. After he walked away, I sat for a while with my coffee and thought about something I had come to believe over many years of building things. Power that is taken always leaves a bill behind. Power that is earned, slowly, by hand, by choice, by showing up when it would have been easier not to, that kind does not arrive with a bill. It arrives with a foundation. My son had the foundation. He had always had it. He had just needed someone to stand beside him long enough for him to see it clearly. That, I think, is what mothers are for. Not to fight every battle, not to clear every path, but to stand at the edge of the hard thing and say, quietly, without rushing, "I see what you built, and I'm not going to let anyone take it while I'm still breathing." If you are listening right now, and you have ever watched someone you love be pushed out of something they created, stay with the truth. Document everything. Move carefully. And do not mistake your patience for weakness, because it is not. It is the most powerful thing you have.